Hello everyone, have a nice day. Today we'll explore Jack and Tu Tien's quiet night at the farm, where simple food, a small fire, and a few gentle gestures reveal the kind of love that heals deeper than words. But just when their hearts finally feel safe, an unknown call threatens to pull them back into fear. If you find this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. The fire was dying, not all at once, just slowly, like it was running out of reasons to stay bright. The last coals glowed under a thin layer of ash, and the cold night air crept in closer, testing the edges of their small circle of warmth. Tu Tien sat with her hands wrapped around a metal cup, watching Jack's face in the flickering light. He was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't mean peace, yet only restraint. Across the yard, the corn hung under the eaves in neat rows, and the puppies slept in a tight pile inside the shelter Tu Tien had sealed against the wind. Everything looked safe, but Tu Tien could feel it anyway. That invisible pressure Jack carried back from the world outside. He stared into the coals, like he was reading a report only he could see. The bridge, the foundation, the risk, the responsibility. The moments in the day where one wrong choice could have ruined everything. Then he exhaled slowly, controlled, and finally spoke. "I keep thinking." Jack's voice was low, rough from a day of dust and command. "If I stop being careful for even 1 second, I lost everything." Tu Tien didn't answer immediately. She reached for the bamboo tube of rice they'd set aside, peeled back the outer layer carefully, and broke off a warm piece with her fingers. She held it toward him, not forcing, just offering. "No luxury," she said softly, "but it's warm." Jack looked at the rice like it was something fragile. Then he took it, his hand brushing hers, and the contact sent a small shiver through Tu Tien's spine, less from cold, more from the meaning inside that tiny moment. He chewed slowly. The smoky bamboo scent rose between them, and for the first time all night, his shoulders dropped a little. Tu Tien watched that change the way someone watches the sky after a storm, waiting to see if the clouds would come back. "You're always building things that have to hold people," she said. Her tone was gentle, conversational. "But you don't let anyone hold you." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it, because it was true. All day, he had been the one with the checklist, the one who measured twice and corrected before mistakes could grow teeth, the one who reminded everyone that safety mattered more than speed. But when it came to his own heart, he worked the same way. He reinforced it. He controlled. He didn't take risks. Even love felt like a structure that could collapse if he trusted it too much. A gust of wind swept across the yard, and Tu Tien instinctively leaned toward the fire, shielding the cup in her hands. Jack stood up at once, reflexed as sharp as a blade, and looked toward the dark field beyond the trees. Tu Tien saw it the way his body changed. The protector, the engineer who could sense danger even when nothing moved. But there was no threat, only at night. Jack returned to sit down, slower now, and Tu Tien reached out, adjusting the warm shirt she had placed over his shoulders earlier. She didn't do it like a dramatic gesture. She did it like it was normal, like it was a habit she wanted to build into their life. Jack's eyes lifted to hers. "Why do you do that?" he asked quietly. Tu Tien blinked. "Do what? Take care of me like..." He hesitated, and for a second he looked younger, less like a CEO, more like a man who wasn't sure he deserved anything gentle. "Like I'm not a burden." Tu Tien's throat tightened. She forced herself to smile, but her eyes stayed serious. "Because you're not," she said. "And because, when you came into my life, you didn't look at me like I was broken." Jack stared at her, the firelight catching the edge of his glasses. The silence between them grew heavy, not uncomfortable, but loaded. Tu Tien could hear the puppies breathe in their shelter. She could hear the corn leaves rustle softly. She could hear her own heart beating too fast. This was the moment where people usually ran, where fear made a person joke, change the subject, pretend they didn't feel too much. But Tu Tien didn't run anymore. She set the cup down and turned fully toward Jack. "You know what scares me?" she said. Her voice was still soft, but it carried weight now. Not the cold, not the farm, not the hard work, I'm not scared of living simply." Jack's eyes stayed locked on her. "I'm scared," Tutien continued, "that one day you'll decide this isn't enough, that you'll look around and think, no luxury means no future." Jack's breath caught. He opened his mouth, but she lifted her hand gently, stopping him. "Let me finish," she whispered, because if she didn't say it now, it would keep growing inside her like a shadow. Tutien looked around the yard at the outdoor stove Jack built, at the bamboo tubes lined neatly on a plank, at the small path he had leveled with his own hands. "This place," she said, swallowing hard. "It's not expensive, it's not perfect, but it's the first place I've felt safe in a long time." Jack's expression shifted, and Tutien saw something crack just a little in the wall he kept up. "And you?" she said. "You're the first person who made me feel like staying was possible." The wind softened. The coals glowed faintly, like they were listening. Jack's voice came out almost like a confession. "I didn't plan any of this," he said. "I thought my life was going to be numbers and projects, and then I met you, and suddenly, everything I built felt empty, unless you were inside it." Tutien's eyes filled before she could stop them. Jack reached out, slow and careful, and wiped a tear away with his thumb like he was afraid he might break her if he moved too fast. "I'm not good at saying things," he admitted. "I'm good at fixing things, measuring things, controlling things." His hand stayed on her cheek. "But I can't control what I feel when I come home and see you under that light," Jack said, nodding toward the eaves. "I can't control how I breathe easier when you're here." Tutien's lips parted and her voice shook. "Then don't control it," she whispered. Jack held her gaze, and for a second, the entire world felt like it narrowed into that one decision. No luxury, just love. But real love was still terrifying, because it asked for forever. Jack's phone buzzed suddenly inside the bag near the doorway. The sound was sharp in the quiet, like a warning bell. Tutien flinched. Jack's eyes narrowed instantly, his body tense again. He reached into the bag and pulled out the phone, the screen lighting his face with a cold glow. Tutien watched the shift, how quickly the world could invade their peace. Jack didn't answer right away. He stared at the caller ID, and something unreadable passed across his face. Tutien's fingers curled into the fabric of her sleeve. The fire gave one last faint crackle, and the night held its breath, waiting to see whether Jack and Tutien could protect what they had, or whether the outside world was about to demand its price. Jack didn't answer. He let the phone buzz until the vibration stopped, like he was refusing to let the outside world enter their firelight. The screen dimmed, but the cold glow it left behind stayed in Tutien's chest. "What was it?" she asked, trying to sound steady. Jack slid the phone into his pocket, jaw tight. "Nothing that matters more than you." Tutien wanted to believe him. She really did. But she'd lived long enough to know that nothing outside ever stayed quiet for long. Peace always came with footsteps behind it. The wind pushed through the trees again. The last coals settled. Jack stood, walked to the stove, and added a small piece of wood, not to make a blaze, just to keep the warmth alive. Tutien watched him with a strange tenderness. He handled love the way he handled construction: reinforce, secure, prevent collapse. But love wasn't a bridge. Love demanded risk. When Jack returned, he didn't sit right away. Instead, he crouched near the shelter, checking the board Tutien had placed earlier. The puppies didn't stir. The mother dog's breathing stayed slow, trusting the night. Jack came back, and this time, he sat close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I meant what I said," he murmured. Tutien looked at him. The firelight made his eyes softer than daylight ever did. "I'm scared," Jack admitted, voice low. "Not living simply, not hard work. I've had harder days than this." He swallowed, the muscles in his throat moving like he was forcing the words through an old habit of silence. "I'm scared of choosing forever and failing you." Tutien's breath caught. Jack lifted his gaze. "Because if I choose you, I don't want to choose halfway. I don't want to make you feel safe today and then leave you shaking tomorrow." The honesty hit Tutien like warmth and pain at the same time. She reached out, slowly, and took his hand. "Jack," she whispered, "I don't need luxury. I don't need perfection." Her thumb brushed the back of his hand small, steady. "I need you to come back," she said. "Even on the days you're tired, even on the days you don't know what to say. Just come back." Jack stared at their hands as if he couldn't believe someone would want him as he was, not as a role, not as a title. The phone buzzed again. One sharp pulse. Tutien flinched, and Jack's eyes hardened instantly. He pulled it out, read the screen, and his expression shifted into something colder, protective, controlled. He turned the screen away from her, out of instinct, then stopped himself. No more hiding. He angled it so she could see. Unknown number. Tutien's stomach tightened. The piece around the fire suddenly felt fragile, like glass. Jack declined the call. Then he did something Tutien didn't expect. He switched the phone off. "There," he said quietly. "Tonight is ours." Tutien exhaled shakily. She didn't realize how much she needed to hear that until the words landed. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and stared into the fire again, but this time he wasn't fighting a war in his head. He was deciding. "Tutien," he said. His voice was steady now, like he'd finally found the right measurement inside his own heart. "If all we ever have is this farm, a warm stove, simple food, and a life we build with our hands." He turned to her fully. "I still want it, as long as it's with you." Tutien's eyes filled again, but she didn't look away. She let him see every feeling she used to hide. "And if tomorrow brings trouble?" she asked, voice trembling. Jack reached up, cupped her cheek, and his touch was firm grounding. "Then we face it together," he said. "Not you alone, not me alone, together." Tutien leaned into his hand, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for happiness to disappear. She felt like she was choosing it. The fire crackled softly as if approving. Jack pressed his forehead lightly to hers. No grand kiss, no performance, just a quiet vow made in breath and warmth. Outside, the wind kept moving through the trees. But inside their circle of light, the decision had already been made. No luxury, just love. And this time forever didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like home.
Hello everyone, in this episode, at night in warm living room, Jack and Tutien sit on both sides of midlife, holding her trembling hands as she collapses under the shock of losing 1 million to Miss Tu. Mom best to know if police can catch her tonight, but Jack focuses on keeping her safe until morning. He calls Wing for updates and learn other investors also can reach Miss Tu. With signs she may be moving out and withdraw cash. Then Jack receives a threatening text. "Stop calling the police." He hides the message to protect Mom, instructs Tutien to put Mom's phone on airplane mode, and set strict safety rules. No replying, no checking, no reacting. During reports, investigators are requesting bank trace and possible CCTV confirmation. Though it will take time, Jack locks the door and stays close and promises to return at dawn with a strong